So we just started recording. So this is the August Circle of the Dark Mother meeting. Circle of the Dark Mother was started by Brandon, James, and I back, I don't know, 2018. Good, you know, I can't remember. And basically, because we are a collection of Dark Mother devotees, Lilith and Hecate mostly, but we love them all. So we decided to start this group. We're based somewhat in Kabbalah, but definitely paganism, hoodoo, and Gnosticism, and pretty much anything else we feel like throwing in, because why not? I don't know if you've all seen my ritual room, so I'll do a quick viewing of it without making James and Brandon be on camera. I don't think they were prepared for that, but and my cord isn't very long, so oh, actually it's stuck. Hold on one second. So my ritual room is in my house, which makes sense, right? And there's 4 Lilith altars. So this is my main altar. This is Lilith as the Dark Mother. To the right is the more bright, and to the left is the darker. And then up there is Neama, which is an aspect of Lilith. That is that altar. Then over here, I have my Lilith altar, which is her in her darker form. And hopefully you can see my screen, by the way. Because if I'm not, I'm just talking about nothing here. And then this is my Lilith 2 altar, which is her in her Sumerian and non-Semitic forms. I do have then a small Hecate altar in there. I do have a cabinet of a whole bunch of different statues from different traditions. And then there is a Pampajira Eshu altar, which is Kimbanda, which is Brazilian. And which is related because they say that Neama is the Pampajira's mother and Lilith is their goddess. Okay, so don't know if anybody has any questions. If you do, we are open to literally any question you want about Lilith or any of her aspects. And if not, I'll just start making up questions and we'll talk about it. So anything you all want to know.
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm only semi-familiar with the basics. You know, one of the sort of standard origin story that you hear about her. That's pretty much most of what I know. She has become quite the feminist icon, and my reliable knowledge ends there. Okay, definitely can do a little bit of an intro. So Lilith, of course, is best known from Jewish sources. Adam's first wife is what most people know. And that's based on the fact that in Genesis 1 says that God created man and woman in their image, actually, not his in Hebrew, because in the Hebrew text, it's Yahweh Elohim, which is father and mother God. And then in Genesis 2, it says that God created man and then created the woman later out of his side. It's usually translated to rib, but it's actually side. And that's Eve. So Jewish people have their midrash, or Jewish tradition, which are a whole bunch of books that have extra biblical stories to explain different teachings. And they're as holy and as canonical to the Jewish culture as a Christian would take the whole Bible. So they are completely relevant, not just side stuff. And they often have stories that even contradict each other, because in Jewish mysticism, there's a lot of this idea of looking at things from multiple ways. And sometimes that sounds like a contradiction, but it's not. So because of those two stories, they brought this idea that,
well, if Eve was created later, who was this woman in Genesis 1? And Lilith is the figure that was used. Prior to Judaism, there are in fact a number of figures that have the name Lil or Lilith in their name in Sumerian culture. So first of all, there's a goddess early on named Ninlil, who is the wife of Enlil, and Lil means air. Ninlil is lady of the air or lady of the wind. She pops up for a while. She disappears after a while. There are some dark entities like Ardit Lily and Mu Lilitu, and then they start talking about the Lilin, which are wind spirits. But then eventually Lilith too is brought in. And it's really confusing because Sumerian and Mesopotamian culture goes through multiple languages. There's Akkadian, Sumerian, Babylonian, and the myths sort of move through there. It's not just one thing, there's a whole bunch of them. Lilith too alternates between being depicted as a very dark goddess to a goddess that's of storms, and also in one text she's described as Inanna's handmaiden, which basically in that case she would have basically been a sacred prostitute in that culture. So there's all these different stories. Judaism later picks up her name, and she is said to be Adam's first wife. In some stories, she's called a demon. She's said to be someone who, in a later time, a being that would come and steal sperm from men when they sleep, and then also that she would kill children. She sort of became like the boogeyman that would kill children when they're young. It was basically this idea of her being crib death, but in that culture. So, you got to ask, why would we follow this being that people sometimes thought was a demon and killing things? Well, those are stories about her, but when you look at the whole genre of who she is, from Sumerian and Judaic texts, she really is this aspect. In Kabbalah, there's this idea of personalities of God, and they come in male and female personalities. The four main ones are father, mother, son, and daughter. And Lilith is an embodiment of the dark daughter or the dark mother. Dark not being evil, but in Kabbalah, there's this idea of mercy and restriction. Both are needed. Mercy is abundance. Severity or restriction is the holding back. And she is this dark aspect of holding back. In Judaism, there's a term called Shekinah or Shekinah, depending on your pronunciation in Hebrew. And that means God's glory and power, much like the Holy Spirit in Christianity, but that entity is always female. Shekinah is basically the daughter and the consort of the father. In some texts, when the bright mother is away, Lilith is the consort of Father God. So her story is a lot more complicated than this idea of her being a demon. In fact, in Mandean literature, so the Mandeans are Gnostics from Iraq and Iran that followed John the Baptist. They actually have a story of the fact that Lilith marries or becomes the wife of a holy being, a prince of heaven, and they have a son who can transverse everything. He's both light and dark. And this son specifically keeps telling people that his mother is being wrongly portrayed, that she actually sits and comforts women in childbirth. So there's, again, contradictions upon contradictions. And I'll let Brandon and James give their reasoning. But from I came to Gnostic Kabbalah first, and she is the fast path to enlightenment, because the bright mother will nurture you and help you and make you feel good, when you're down, and that's good. That's something important. Lilith is the mother who, when you aren't doing what's good for you, she kicks your butt and says, go do what you're supposed to. And so she will bring chaos to your life to make you see who you really are. That's what she's about. And I know Jean mentioned the idea of her being a feminist. That's based in this idea of, being Adam's first wife, and that he wanted to dominate her during sex. And she said, no, I'm equal to you. So she ends up flying off and not, staying with Adam. And so that's part of, the reason she's considered a feminist. The other reason is because she wants you to be who you are, not who other people think you are. And I'll let Brandon and James talk too, now that I've gone on and on. You will have to talk up because the mic is in this, so.
Well, the way that I came to her was through, Christianity, which seems like such an odd way to find her. I was studying Christian mysticism and Jewish mysticism simultaneously at the same time. And it says in the Jewish scriptures, in the Midrash and the Mishnah, that whenever the Shekinah, that would be the feminine presence and power of God, is in exile, meaning a person has not reached their enlightenment and liberation, that Lilith is the matronate of the Most High. And that really throws people who are interested in Lilith, because they first assume that her consort is Samael, the angel of death. But actually, Lilith has two consorts. In her merciful aspect, she's connected to the Hebrew god Yahweh. She represents a dark feminine face of that force that is programmed towards self-realization for the sake of reunification. She's done everything for me in my life. There's not one thing that I have that she hasn't given me. As hard as a mother as she is, a tough mistress she can be, everything that she does is for the sake and development of yourself, even if it is a really, really difficult situation. As soon as you transcend the situation, she offers us what looks like a hard wall. But once we pass through that hard wall, we're able to look and see that the whole time she was actually an extraordinarily nurturing goddess, allowing us to transcend our own limitations and expectations. So.
Well, I haven't worked with Lilith as much as Mark and Brandon. I originally have worked with the goddess Hecate for a very long time. Like, she's still like my main goddess. But the way that I discovered Lilith was through Brandon. Essentially, Lilith and Hecate are extremely similar to each other. They're the spirits of Lilith and Hecate. Like, they essentially, it's like one will lead you to the other at times, depending on what is going on in your life. Hecate, for me, has been just like an extremely motherly guide, whereas Lilith has been essentially like a doer, like an activator, a manifester. Like, Lilith is, if I were to describe her spirit, is a little bit more physically present on the earth, whereas Hecate's spirit is in constant motion in different areas all over the place. Really as well, with Hecate and Lilith, like, the reason why they're so similar is because in Judaism, they don't really have other dark goddesses or dark like feminine archetypes except for Lilith. So every time there is like a face or a spirit that appears that is like other spirits in Judaism, they will always call it Lilith, like, at all times. And Hecate is one of the spirits who is most like the spirit of Lilith. People always confuse the two all the time. You'll see Hecate and Lilith people arguing. Their artwork, people who make artwork of Hecate and Lilith look extremely similar to each other. In fact, if they were standing next to each other, it might be very difficult to tell them apart. But essentially, like through my experience, I've noticed that they have very distinct personalities, very essentially like they come and go at times and in areas when they are very much so needed. Like Lilith is very much so needed when women are being oppressed, when they're going through hard, like very restrictive times in their life. Pretty much any time when you are going through a lot of darkness, essentially what is called the dark night of the soul, can be attributed to the spirit Lilith, like pushing you, challenging you, trying to get you to understand something or to see something that you're not seeing. But people can also say that Hecate, the goddess, does the exact same thing as well. Like both Lilith and Hecate are similar in the sense that they perform like the same functions, but in different ways at times.
I mean, they're the archetype of each other. If you were Greek and were interested in working with a particular spirit, it would have been Hecate. If you were a Jewish person, it would have been Lilith. But I think that points to the fact that the dark goddess is archetype. You can find her throughout any religion, whether it's Kali. Lilith is the Kali of Kabbalah.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, and really, you know, to what Brandon and James said, I work with Hecate some. I see her as more cosmic, where Lilith is more in your face kind of thing. But to me, they're two of the best that work together. You know, I've had Lilith sort of direct me to Hecate for the more cosmic look at things, but then I always end up back at Lilith. Marcy had a great question. So she said, I know some people make a conscious decision to approach Lilith for various reasons. Do you think it's ever kind of a situation when someone might recognize, remember, or be reminded of her and open the door to the transformation she brings, because deep down they know that's what they need and that it's more of a subconscious thing? Absolutely. I look at my story. So I was, when I first encountered her at like 10 or 12 in a Vampirella comic. You know, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and, you know, I read all kinds of comic books, and she popped up in there. Then, you know, fast forward, didn't think about her for years. I have a master's in theology and was a youth pastor in a Fundy church. I was never the judgmental side of fundamentalism, but I was in that church and I was a youth pastor. And we used to pray. All the pastors got together on Sundays and prayed. And I remember praying over and over, God, show me who you really are. Well, next thing I know, I'm following Lilith. So I became a heretic, and my whole life turned upside down, and I started studying Gnosticism and Kabbalah, and there she is again, right? So I think Kabbalah is a very psychologic practice as well as spiritual. And there's this idea in Kabbalah that Lilith and Samael, which is sort of her male counterpart, not a demon, he's actually an archangel, a very dark one, and Adam and Eve, or Hava in Hebrew, are actually all four aspects of our personality. And we have to balance all four parts. Some of us need more Lilith, some of us need more Eve, because maybe we're too harsh and we need that. So that's a Kabbalistic idea that archetype is part of all of us. So I think sometimes it is a remembrance or a subconscious, and maybe they don't even call it Lilith. But you know, when people start to realize who they really are and fight against being stuck in some paradigm that's not them, that's definitely her spirit.
It sounds to me like it's an invitation into deeper spirituality and deeper awareness, because Lilith exists in every single human being's soul. There's a part of her, and every woman knows that she exists in her intimately, whether they'll admit it or not. If you're getting a vision of Lilith here or there, she pops up, it's probably an invitation to understanding in your own darkness and to working through it to become your greatest self.
Or what you think is your darkness, but really isn't darkness.
Yeah, what you need to come to terms with.
Mm-hmm.
And she's the type of goddess who takes the thing that you believe is unacceptable and really accepts it and then transforms it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also it's an invitation to transforming the things in our life that aren't working for us into things that do.
Yeah, I've seen where some people try to use her for very dark things. And I mean dark as in not just severe, but I mean
kill someone.
Cursing, yeah, ridiculous cursing. And the thing being, Lilith always sort of mirrors back to you, not saying she's the person who tries to do a killing curse, that she's necessarily going to kill them, but she usually is like, is that what you really want? Let's show you what that means. So she takes our darkness and shows it back to us in a way that helps us to transform through it. And sometimes accept that what we think is dark about us is actually not. Because society says it is. But, like especially women with sexuality, if you're in the LGBT community, if you have been taught that you're supposed to be meek and whatever gender you are, and that's not who you really are. Now, if that's who you are, that's great. But so many of us have been programmed to be who we've been told to be. And she does not like that. She wants us to be who we really are.
And there's a reward on the other side of all of it too. It's not just she puts you through a hard time and you get through it and she puts you through a hard time, you get through it and you have a great realization and life improves.
And I know some people that say, well, I don't want to work with her because I don't want things to be difficult. The difficulty becomes because she says, hey, look at this. Well, if we do, great, then we transform. If we don't, then she goes, hey, and she pokes us. And she'll allow things to happen that are, if we don't deal with what's going on, she'll be like, that's what you think you want? Okay, here, have some more, until you sort of work through it. So that's why sometimes it can be real difficult.
Some of the people we do spell work with, I always know that Lilith has appeared on the scene and that it is her specifically. Because people won't come to me and say, oh, they don't know anything about it. They'll come and say, all the truth is coming out. This has come out. We didn't even know what we were dealing with. It's because she takes everything that's hidden and just brings it right to the surface to get dealt with.
Very good question, Jean. Jean said, I've just gotten into two things. I've just gotten into burlesque and her name is a common stage name. Because of that, yes, because she's seen as very sexual. Some men use her very inappropriately. They try to make her control her. And that ain't gonna work. She's gonna control you.
Yeah.
But then your comments, so would it be fair to say that she is like the Tower card, or would she be more like the Dark High Priestess? I'd say both. She's the Dark High Priestess that makes the lightning strike come if you don't pay attention. She'll let the tower stand until it can't anymore. Then she'll bring the change.
It's like if it was a tower, it's like she takes lightning and takes off pieces of it to reveal what it's like underneath.
And if you don't deal, then it eventually will crash down. And interesting you bring that up. So my next book, not to plug it, it's still in edit. But what I'm doing, it's a Kabbalah book with Lilith. So I do the 10 Sephirot with aspects of her, and then I do the Netavit, which are the paths on the Tree of Life, which are the tarot cards and also the Hebrew letters. And each one of the cards, I do what the path is about based on the card and the letter, but then I go into how Lilith fits that scenario. And you're completely right. The tower, the High Priestess, the World, Wheel of Fortune. They all have a piece of her, but those are big.
Queen of Swords for her, Queen of Pentacles for Naama.
Yeah.
There's plenty.
Yeah, absolutely. So what other questions? I mean, we can talk forever, believe me. So what other questions do y'all have? Yep, judgment, absolutely. Because judgment is not, people think of judgment as, because in Christianity, this idea of God judging you, but it's you judging yourself. Yep, showing yourself back to you, exactly. So I'll flip the next slide. I do have a couple slides just to spark conversation. So the first one is, what are some of the names, aspects, and related beings in Sumeria? So Lilith 2 is the name that is closest to her. Ardat Lili, Omaraka, which is much like Tiamat, a dragon entity, but is an aspect of Lilith. Mu Lilitu, which I think is Babylonian. Lili, Lil, Lilim, Lilin, and Lilu are the names for her children, which are wind spirits. And then Lamashtu isn't exactly Lilith, but a lot of what Lamashtu is what is later attributed to Lilith. Lamashtu is the daughter of the sun god. She is a wind spirit. She appears in many different, like a conglomeration of human and animal form. And she is said to take children. Lilith never does this in Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian lore. Lamashtu is the one who takes children and punishes parents that aren't, really taking care of the kids properly. That is not that's not Lilith, but those are attributed to her later, so I throw that in. Cain asked, is Lilith the original ancient queen of heaven? So that's a good question, because Inanna or Ishtar is called queen of heaven. Lilith in some ways is a dark mirror to Lilith, to Inanna. Inanna is, even though as Ishtar, she can get pretty dark. She does become more of a war goddess later on, but originally she's sort of like the springtime, beautiful, romantic goddess, where Lilith is the darker moon goddess, so to speak. In Kabbalah, Lilith can be called the queen of heaven and the queen of hell. Now that's not, in Kabbalah, that's not saying she's really the queen of heaven the way that Christians think of heaven, or hell the way Christians think of hell. Heaven and hell in Kabbalah, there's actually 7 of each, and they're afterlife states. They're states of mercy or states of severity. So it's not saying she's some demon, but she's a queen of the light and the dark. So good question, King. Hey, Angelina, we're doing a Lilith Q&A, and we've had a few questions, and we've been going into some of it. Right now, I'm showing a slide with some of the names, aspects, or related beings to Lilith and Sumeria. Good question, Marcy. So Marcy asks, would Lilith be somehow related to Reshkagal? I love a Reshkagal personally, and yes. So they're not. So in Sumerian literature, they're not the same being, but I would say that she's much more like a Reshkagal than she is Inanna. So Inanna or Ishtar, Reshkagal is her sister, and she's the queen of the underworld. Reshkagal has most of the same attributes of Inanna, but it's, instead of life, she's death. So yeah, I think Lilith has a relationship both to Inanna and Reshkagal, sort of as an aspect of both in a way, but not really the same in that culture.
One of the things that Cain was asking, he said her function is the queen of heaven. To a Jewish person looking at the Virgin Mary, they see Lilith.
Yep.
So, if you're a Jewish person, then obviously a woman being depicted, the fact that she's had a child, a number of things related there. A Jewish person looking at the Christian tradition met the mother named Mary as Lilith.
Yeah, and especially if you would look at ancient Jews, before Christianity even existed, they would absolutely see the Christian iconography of Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, all of those figures as Lilithian.
Yeah.
Especially Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, Mary Magdalene. And in Gnosticism, Mary Magdalene is sometimes seen as the joining of Eve and Lilith in one being.
Mary, yeah.
To spark conversation, I'll go to the next slide. So these are some of the names, aspects, and related beings in Hebrew. So sometimes she's called Lilith, sometimes Lilith. They're in the literature, there's Lilith the Younger and Lilith the Elder. Very unclear which is what the difference is, although Lilith the Younger is supposed to be the consort of Ashmedai, or Asmodeus in more common language. And I know everybody thinks Ashmedai is a demon. He's actually more like what the Gnostics call an archon,
Yeah.
more like a jinn.
Yeah. He's like like a ghost that wasn't given a body.
Yeah, because that's really because he's a Shadim. He's the king of the Shadim, and they're like humans that didn't get bodies exactly.
Yeah.
Lilith the Elder is the consort of Samael, who's just like Adam and Eve are one being. In Kabbalah, Lilith and Samael were one being that were separated. Ne'ama is sometimes said to be Lilith's daughter. She's also said to be her sister. She's said to be the sister of Tubal-Cain and also the wife of Noah in the Quran. And then later we'll see that she's also called Noria in Gnostic literature. Ne'ama means pleasant. And really the way I see Ne'ama is as Lilith who has been incarnate. So she's the energy of Lilith that actually lived, if you believe she was the sister of Tubal-Cain and these different entities. In Kabbalah, Lilith, Ne'ama, Agrat Bat Malat, and Aishet Zunanim are all called the spirits of prostitution. You got to understand that in American culture and Western culture, Christian culture, that sounds really negative. But, and I'll jump ahead, Aishet Zunanim is also called Kadesha, and Kodesh is holy. So she's considered a holy prostitute. And the idea there is it's not really about sex, it's about this joining, this coming together.
She transmits knowledge, wisdom to the person. It's a companionship, a spiritual companionship.
And
Yes.
she gives it to all, which
Yes.
is what makes her the prostitute.
Yes, exactly. And that's one thing. So the mother is called in Gnosticism, they'll say that the mother god is virgin and whore. Gnostics love to say things that sound really controversial, but what they're saying is she never changes yet. She is open to all beings, not a sexual thing and not negative. It's actually showing what a beautiful mother spirit she is. So Lilith, and there's a question, is Lilith the Younger actually Ne'ama?
Yes.
Because Ne'ama is said to be the consort of Ashmedai.
And you have to think, Ashmedai, to call on him is Shadim,
Mhm.
but to call on Ne'ama is Shadima.
And Noria is like Lilith the Elder. At least that's the way that I
Noria, I think of her as Ne'ama.
Noria?
She's more enlightened than the way they describe Ne'ama, though.
Yeah.
She's almost like Ne'ama enlightened.
Mhm.
Because in the Gnostic text, she actually is a savior. She's basically a Messiah or a Christ. And Noah won't let her on the ark, so she burns it down and makes him build another one in one of the stories.
3 times.
So there's a whole bunch of names here. The most common are Lilith the Younger, Lilith the Elder, Ne'ama, Agrat Bat Malat, which means Agrat, daughter of Malat, Aishet Zunanim.
Abizuth.
Abizuth is in the testimony of Solomon, is another aspect of Lilith. Malat being Agrat Malat, Agrat's mother. Nega, Mesket, Asirta, and Lilitha are only mentioned a couple times, but they're all definitely Lilithian spirits.
I think of Nega as a Naga, the serpent goddess. That's what I draw from that name.
Yep. And Lilitha is only mentioned once too, and I forget in what. She's only mentioned in one text. And it does say in a lot of the Jewish texts that Lilith has hundreds of names. So to me, these are just aspects of the same being with slightly different personalities and manifestations. Lilith's name in Hebrew is Lamed Yod Tav. And Hebrew is not like English. In English, our letters don't mean anything. So if you look at my name, Mark, it's just M-A-R-K. M doesn't mean anything. It's a sound. Well, in Hebrew, the letters actually mean something. Lamed's literal meaning is ox goad, which means to push or to direct or to lead. Delet is a door, something that lets things in or helps things pass through. And then Tav, the last letter of her name, I'm sorry, I was doing a different one. Yod means spirit of God, and Tav means unification. So her name is Lamed Yad Tav. And so what that means is that which draws you to God, that which draws you to God and ends in unification. Kabbalistically, what that means is she's a spirit of enlightenment. And then the last slide I have, and we'll just go back to questions and topics, are some of her names and aspects and related beings not in Judaism or Sumerian stories. So Nori, as we mentioned, is the same name as Neama, meaning pleasant, but it's in Coptic. And she is a Gnostic figure. She's sort of like Neama enlightened. Sophia Negrans is Greek for dark wisdom. Belquis, who, if you've watched American Horror Story, is mentioned. Belquis is the Queen of Sheba, and she is in some Kabbalistic text. She's a consort of King Solomon, and she is said to be Lilith. Karina is the consort of the head of the jinn, and is a Arabic version of Lilith. It's said that the Lamia in Greek tradition is related to Lilith by some. Thelemic tradition from Aleister Crowley, Babylon, is definitely Lilith. In fact, he says it's sort of that Babylon is the modern manifestation of Lilith. In the New Testament, the whore of Babylon is actually Lilith. In my book, Embracing Lilith, I talk about the sort of the iconography they use for her, and the fact that she wears purple and she holds a cup, which is like a grail, but it's full of obscenities, and she rides the beast with 10 horns, which is the tree of shadows. So it's definitely a Lilith figure. And if you listen to Christianity, the whore of Babylon is a horrible figure, but if you read it from a Kabbalistic standpoint, she is the spirit that pushes us to change. And if we don't want to change, we don't like her. And that's very Lilithan. And then in Kimbanda, Pampajira, which means swirling dove, are female deities of legion. Some of them are deities, some of them are spirits, some are the dead, some are elemental spirits, all female, and they have all the properties of Lilith. In some forms of Kimbanda, they say that the Pampajira is Neama's daughter and that Lilith is their queen. So these are all, again, outside of Judaism or Sumerian tradition. These are beings that are closely related. So what other questions or anything pops up?
Sophia Negrans and Babylon, like those two traditions just like merge for me. Like really, like every time someone says Sophia Negrans, I think of Babylon.
Absolutely. I think Sofia Garance is more the Gnostic
version.
back in the day,
Yeah.
where Thelema they've named her Babylon, taking the idea of Babylon from the New Testament, but taking the Y out to make it a little more palatable for one, and making it more modern, I think.
Yeah, like, because even with Babylon, like Crowley back then, just using Lilith's name was inappropriate for just religious conversation.
Oh yeah,
because she's the devil. So like to just say her name to like a bunch of Jewish people would be like calling on her.
yeah.
I think it's very interesting that Aleister Crowley named his daughter Lilith Hecate, and she died of crypt death.
Oh gosh, that's awful. She died, but that is bizarre.
Yeah, but they said at the time that way he treated women and everything like that. So if anything, it was a major fuck you to him from the spirit world.
Yeah, brilliant man, but yeah, there were some things. So what are the questions or anything anyone would want to know?
So, as you were talking, one of the things that struck me was that how often, and I'm not sure if I'm going to phrase this very coherently, which is why I didn't want to put it in the chat. So you know how a lot of what Christianity would call Old Testament and Judaism would call like Torah, a lot of those stories have a lot of the same sort of contradictions or something or discrepancies within the same story. And it's because when the Hebrew people were enslaved, especially, out in Egypt and taken to Egypt, all of the different tribes were sort of mishmashed together, and all of the scribes were like, well, we don't want to lose all of this information and tradition that we have, so let's just write it all down together and we'll mash everything together so nothing gets lost, even if it doesn't make sense. And that's you. So, you get the whole, like, there's I think 5 or 7 different authors of the Noah's flood story. Could something like that be happening with Lilith in the sense that there's those discrepancies and variations and contradictions within the same stories?
Absolutely. So really good question and good insight. So the Torah, which is the first 5 books of what we call the Old Testament now, if you're Jewish, you call it the Torah. But they're attributed in Jewish tradition to Moses, but it's pretty well known by scholars that was all actually written down while the Jews were in Babylonian exile. The stories were created during the time of them in Egypt and then in their own place, because the Exodus didn't happen quite the way we were told either, from what's been seen through other historical stuff. But you're right. They wrote it all down and brought all these different things together, and that's why there are all these different names for God, like Yahweh, Elohim, El Shaddai, Ahia, all these different names. And just Genesis, when you read Genesis 1, where I talked about the idea that was created where man and woman were created in God's image. That actually is an Elohimist text, which means when they use the name of God, they say Elohim created man and woman in their image. Genesis 2 is a Yahwehan text. When they say God, they use the word Yahweh, which is much more, Yahweh was originally a storm god and a more masculine patriarchal figure, where Elohim originally was assumed to be male and female, later becomes more the mother. So they put all this together, and you're right, they didn't want to lose any of these traditions. They plop all these, a bunch of people got together and said, well, this is what I heard, this is what I heard. So somebody finally writes it down. And if you look at an interlinear Bible where they have the different, like Hebrew for the Old Testament, Greek for the New, you'll see in the Torah that names of God are different all over the place. That later becomes this idea that it's in Kabbalah that there are different aspects of this one God. But in some ways, they were just totally different to the people beings, completely different beings. So you're right, because if you think about it, they wrote some of this down while they were in Babylon. Well, where did Lilith start?
Babel.
Sumeria, later Babylon. So, and Persia, they were in exile there, they were conquered by the Persians. So there's a lot of stories about Lilith that are these that start out because they brought in that name from the Babylonian sources, and then later they just sort of use her in a whole bunch of different places.
All over the place.
All over the place, different time periods.
Yeah.
Some of the more ones where they're more lascivious and she's more dark were actually written in like the Middle Ages. So her character changes. And I think that's a really interesting thing too for us as people. If you look at Lilith from her beginnings in Sumeria, she starts out as a storm goddess, a goddess of the wind. And then even in Sumerian text, she starts to get a little darker, and she becomes this in between Inanna and Ereshkigal, and this handmaiden. And then you get into Jewish tradition, she's the first wife of Adam, then she becomes this demon, and then she becomes the consort of Yahweh when the matronet's away. And so the story just evolves. Now we get to today, right? Well, and then you got the Gnostics looking at her and Noria as the savior. You get to today and we see her, we almost see her back to how she started. We have all the in-between too, but we're starting to see her as this goddess of change. Storms are certainly all about change, right? Wind and lightning and downpours, and everything changes. So I think she's all the above because you can't put her in a box. So great question and very good insight into the fact that those stories were cobbled together out of different traditions. Which is really interesting because you learn that in seminary, by the way, but then they never talk about it again when you get into the church. So.
I learned it through PBS. PBS did around Christmas and around Easter, they tend to do a lot of, let's take a scholarly look at this portion of the Bible type of stuff.
Oh, good.
And one of the other things that those bits came from a special on who wrote the Bible. But there's another one that they did about, were the Jewish people actually originally monotheistic?
Mm-hmm.
And there's evidence that the very earliest ones weren't.
Nope.
And that it was more of like a kind of the same way that Constantine made everybody Christian. There was a leader that just was like, okay, we're just doing this one entity now. You need to get rid of the other statues.
Yep. And that happened over time to some degree, but it was mostly because of the times they were conquered. They decided they had to have one
State.
Well, and one sort of, state, because they wanted to rule themselves, but also they had to have one culture that they survived in. Think about it. You're in horrible times and people are conquering you. What is my culture? So you got to sort of preserve something. And it's very clear that, so what we hear about the time in the Old Testament and from, popular culture, you hear that the Jewish people were all descended from, the brothers that went to Egypt. Well, history actually shows, archaeology and genealogy and all and genetics show that the Semitic people that were in Egypt were actually a conglomeration of different Semitic groups, but then start to get an identity as one people. But a lot of the tradition, the Jewish tradition starts out, again, there's Elohimists that start out with El as the main god. There's the Yahwehists that start with Yahweh, but they also have a Shira, which is also a Canaanite goddess. They worshipped a god and a goddess in most of these cultures. But because the Canaanites worshipped Asherah, they ended up stopped using her name because they didn't want to be associated with who they thought weren't, clean and part of their tradition. So it goes from basically what you see in most cultures in that region to monotheistic, but in the mysticism, they recognize the fact they came from not one god, but they see it as aspects of the entity beyond all. And then Gnostics pick that up. And then Christianity misunderstands the idea that in Judaism, there's, the name Yahweh is Yod He Vav He, 3 different letters. One is duplicated. And really, God is Father, Mother, Son, and Daughter. And so that becomes the Trinity in Christianity. The mother and the daughter get combined, and then they turn her into a dude.
Yeah, for the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, exactly. And picture her as a dove, which is used in some of the picture of her, but not literally. So, little divergent from Lilith, but it all connects, right? I mean, Lilith would be more like the when Noah sends out the raven and it doesn't come back. That's more Lilith.
Yeah.
The dove is sort of the bright mother that's like, hey.
And I'm back.
So what other questions or anything you have interest in Lilith or any of her aspects? So Marcy says, what are your feelings on Lilith and the other dark mothers in popular culture right now? It's interesting from my perspective. There's a whole bunch of shows that have had Lilith and comics. She's the daughter of Dracula in Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
In Supernatural, she's a demon that starts the apocalypse. In Vampirella, she's Vampirella's mother, actually. You find out later she doesn't start out that way. She appears in
True
Blood as the first vampire. And then the dark mothers pop up like in Sabrina. Hecate is in that, and Lilith is in that too. I have mixed feelings. I think it's good that dark mothers are being represented because they've been so demonized by the church. And pagans know that the dark mother is super important, whether that's their deity or not. Pagans tend to know that we need all the aspects, whether we work with them or not. Christianity has, first of all, cut out, because of its later tie to patriarchy, has cut out all of the mothers, and except for Mary sometimes, and she's brought down quite a bit, that aspect. Of course, our Latin and Mexican brethren, Guadalupe, is definitely a dark mother. She's actually a manifestation of both the Christian, Judeo-Christian mother and Tenochtitlan, the Aztec goddess with the knife skirt. She's a death goddess. So definitely a dark mother. So I have a mixed feeling. I like the portrayal to a good degree. I mean, it's a show in Sabrina. I don't like the way they portray the dark feminine in Supernatural as much as I like the show. I don't like that. Lucifer doesn't do a bad job, actually, as a comedy. They actually don't do a bad job with the dark feminine. They have God's wife, the mother of all creation, pop up for a while, and it's a comedy. They take it pretty tongue in cheek, but it's cool.
It's also by Neil Gaiman, so that would also explain why it's better.
Yes, true.
Lucifer was not a comedy.
Yes, very true. Very true. And they do a lot of good stuff in that show, by the way. I mean, I have trouble because I have a master's in theology and I studied a lot of traditions. And when they screw it up, I mean, they don't have to be perfect. It's a TV show, it's a comedy. But when they screw it up so bad that it's like, that's not even close, it really bothers me. So when they do their diligence, like they did in Lucifer with a lot of stuff, they turn it around, make it fit the plot and make it funny? Yes. But there's little things they do that are like, wow, you did your homework. So it's a mix for me, and I'll let Brandon and James say, but it's a mix. I'm glad they're portraying them. Some of them are better than others. That's my bottom line.
I think it just speaks to the fact that she's coming forward more and more and more into the mainstream of our consciousness. And in Kabbalah, this is the age of the daughter. So this is the age where woman rises again. And who better than the very first woman to rise again and to enter into our collective subconscious. And she shows us that she is still here, just like in ancient Sumerian. She's still not been defeated.
Nope. You think about it, she's actually got a Sumerian goddess. She's the only one who's gotten big, modern playtime. Some of the others are known. I mean, Ishtar you hear about and stuff, but who has a music festival named after them and is in every TV show? Lilith.
I don't know who's every little girl's hero that's went the wrong way in life. It's
And I think Hecate, like I read a lot of books where Hecate's in them, fiction books. And I think she's handled very well personally for the most part.
Yeah, I've only ever seen Sabrina where they feature Hecate. I haven't really seen much else of anything.
It's mostly books that have her. There's a number of books I've read recently, which I was not reading them because I did not know Lilith or Hecate were in them. And there's been 2 or 3 where both of them are in it together as working together.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting. Marcy's, oh wait, I missed one from Jean. So I see Lilith. Oh, come on, stupid computer.
Basically, I was just asking about animal associations because as we can see from your altar, there's a lot of depictions with her with the serpent, and I wonder how much of that is because she actually traditionally was, I don't know, was she associated with the serpent, or is that more of a Christianization because she's a demon who's the consort of the devil, or does she have other animal associations?
I would look at it as the Kundalini versus the serpent of evil or good or of the devil. She is the serpent. Sometimes on my altar, if I'm in a trance with her, sometimes even just by accident, I will see a large black serpent with glowing green eyes upon my altar moving around. Definitely serpent energy, but also black cats, pigs, donkeys, any animal that cannot regenerate on its own, like a donkey can't. It's a mule. A mule. I'm sorry, a mule, because it can't regenerate. Snakes, scorpions, owls, of course.
Owls are biggest.
Shellfish, yeah, anything that has a shell on it, anything to do with a snake or calling snakes. Pigs, she's famous for riding on a pig to piss off the Jews.
Because it's unclean in Judaism. So the snake is an interesting thing. So the serpent in Eden in Kabbalah is actually called Nakash. That is the word in Hebrew. And Nakash has the same gematria or numerical value as the word Messiah or Messiah. And what that means is they are related. And what a Kabbalist will say is what the serpent starts, the Messiah finishes. And what it is us becoming individuals and then finding enlightenment.
And lifting that serpent in us up into its realization.
And definitely Kundalini, as you said, that's extremely present. There was a period during 13th, 14th, 15th centuries in Christianity where they depicted the serpent in the garden like a lamia, where the top half was a woman and the bottom was a serpent. And they said that was Lilith, that she was the one that tempted Eve. Actually, in Kabbalah, what they say is that Lilith was the serpent, but Samiel rode her and forced her to do what the serpent did. In any case, in most metaphysical traditions, serpents are wisdom, not evil. So it's a really interesting, a really interesting combo, but the Kundalini energy is definitely the biggest part. So the whole thing with, and Marcy's thing about says, and let me get back to animals, but don't many cultures regard the serpent as a symbol of transformation? Yes, because of shedding the skin. If you've ever seen the movie Noah with, what's his name?
Russell Crowe.
Russell Crowe. It got a lot of really bad press, and there's parts of it that are a little confusing. But if you watch, they show Adam and Eve in the garden, and they're beings of spirit. They're not physical beings. And there's this glowing snake. It sheds its skin and becomes black, and it goes to tempt them. And it's almost like this idea that it puts on this vision of being evil to do what it needs to do for them.
It does what has to be done.
Yeah, that just got me. But as Brandon said, and James said too, any animal that was seen as unclean was associated with Lilith, because again, this is this woman who didn't obey her husband. So there's a lot of that. Plus, when she leaves Eden after she tells, basically, and excuse my language, but tells Adam to fuck off, she flies away and she goes to the land of Nod, which is eternal night. And so any animal of night, jackals, any animals that are nocturnal are associated with her.
A black dog, especially.
Yep. And owls are her biggest. I mean, she's always depicted with owls. In fact, I have a whole collection of owl statues because it's Lilith. I've even seen her in vision as a giant owl.
I can tell probably about 6 years ago, I was going through a really dark night of my soul. And the window where I was sleeping at the time, a fucking owl had made a nest outside of where I was sleeping. And for 3 or 4 nights, I heard nothing but this owl screeching. And it preceded probably the darkest event that I have ever went through in my entire life. I knew that it was her. But it also ended up leading me to the greatest happiness that I've ever found in my life. So I definitely know when I hear the owl sound that it is her.
And interesting that owls and serpents in different cultures are associated with wisdom. Let's see here. Oh, it went too far. Sometimes Windows is a pain. Oh, so Gene's been collecting owls too.
Oh, cool.
Yep. Owls, ravens, all of the dark birds are associated. Interesting thing too, I read this book, a couple books on early Indo-European culture, which starts, it's the Celts, but it starts somewhere around Asia Minor and spreads out to India and out into Europe. And they actually say that all goddesses start out as either cow goddesses, fertility and culture, or horse goddesses. The horse goddesses are the dark goddesses because they're wild. So another interesting, and you're right, owls are air creatures, just like Lilith, meaning air.
Hecate started out as a horse goddess.
Oh, interesting. Like Rhiannon and Epona in Celtic tradition,
Yep, Hecate has lots of horses imagery.
and dark dogs too,
Mhm.
right? And owls. Yeah, that's Hecate and Lilith's imagery just collide. There's so much in common. Um, in fact, I saw a picture someone did of Hecate, and I was convinced at first it was Lilith because it's exactly how I see her.
Me too.
Now, I'm not saying they're the same being, but they are definitely related entities. What other questions, comments, thoughts, or anything anyone want to know? Yeah, I've heard that too, that people think Hecate and Lilith are sisters.
There's just no there's no Hebrew
Yeah.
basis for it.
You can't like historically like
Right.
bridge them together. You can in like a tradition, in like a spiritual way, but like,
Energetically.
yeah. But
I
like
meant that they were more like the best friends that everyone mistakes as sisters.
some people say that Lilith and Hecate hate each other, but it just doesn't make sense.
I have a Lilith altar next to a Hecate altar, which is James, for 4 years, and Lilith and Hecate, I can tell when it's Hecate doing it, and I can tell when it's Lilith doing it.
And I've had their
totally different.
statues on the same altar at times, and there's no
Mhm.
problem. I know there's people that say that they hate each other. I think it really comes down to, I don't think any deities hate each other. The question is, are their energies compatible? I think Hecate and Lilith are, but it's also the energies in you. Like if you see a dichotomy, you're going to have a dichotomy, right?
If you see a problem, you've already created one.
Right,
It's yours.
exactly. I just, a lot of times when you do Kabbalistic ritual, we open a sphere instead of a circle. Not saying one's better than the other, that's just the paradigm. So you do the directions, but you do down, up, and inside. And a lot of times I will do up as Hecate, with the directions being Lilith, and sometimes Pampajura is below. So again, this is what I do. Not saying everyone needs to do it that way, but I combine them all the time. Okay, I know we've been on for an hour and 15 minutes, so I don't want to keep people too long, but anything anybody else would like to know, I don't want to, cut us off either. If there's anything anybody wanted to know about Lilith. I am planning to do, and I know Brandon and I have talked about this too, having the three of us go through all of the Lilith books I have and do a little like, this is about this, this is about this. I personally, somebody said to rate them, but they're all so different.
Yeah,
And we don't want to
very
piss off
difficult.
authors.
Well,
Yeah.
and I love them all. They're different. I mean, some I don't agree with. It's not the way I do it, but that doesn't mean I don't love that they
Mhm.
talked about Lilith.
Or they can't help you where you need to
Right.
be.
There's only one book that I don't like, but I have it because I have every Lilith book I found. There's one that it's called The Case for Lilith, actually, which sounds like it would be a good book, but it's basically from somebody who is some type of fundamentalist who talks about how Lilith is the root of all evil. And if you are a bad person, you are Lilith's child. And what really bothers me, it's one thing to have that perspective. That's how he feels, that's his deal. But he also goes through the biblical texts and says things that make no sense. So it does.
It even
bother me.
has aliens in it every now and then. It's ridiculous.
It's very strange. And this whole thing that Lilith, he says Lilith is created by Lucifer. Lucifer was originally a Greco-Roman deity, so Lucifer wasn't around when the original stories of Lilith. It just doesn't make sense. So that's the only book I would say, if you're pro-Lilith, you probably don't want to read it. Yeah, I agree. Let's hope he doesn't share any more of his Kool-Aid. I have the book again because I have literally every Lilith book I've ever been able to find. There's quite a few that are about her from a feminist standpoint. There's some that take her myth and do interesting things with them. There's some that equate her more in like a Wiccan way, which is not how I work, but it's totally cool because they love her, and that's great. So we will do that at some point. Basically divide them up into different types and be like, these are all about this. This is all about that. And of course, I will plug shamelessly my book, Embracing Lilith, if you want to read my version. So. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I have no idea what we're going to do next month, but the first Sunday of September, we will have another meeting at 6:30 Eastern time, and will be broadcast. We will talk about what we're going to do. We've talked about doing Kali at some point because that was suggested. Haven't done it because I was real sick part of this month and didn't really have time to go do the research. We will talk about anything as long as we know something about it. If we don't, we'll tell you that. If anybody ever wants to get on and do something, do their own presentation, reach out to me and we can talk about, how it fits. And we will do another ritual later in the year, probably Samhain. We'll do a live ritual also. That's always my Lilith ritual, so yay. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here and sharing energy and questions, and really enjoy, of course, love talking about Lilith, and really happy to talk with all y'all.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.